I'm just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Bitch, please, you've been to space.
Spider-Man, Far From Home, is the millionth Marvel blah 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 of Peter Parker blah blah broad, which is kinda different, but he has 2 lives to juggle blah blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
And hey, Mysterio's here. I remember his level from the Spider-Man 2 game.
You have trifled with my power for the last time. I will not hold back. You face your doom.
The film is out in an interesting time for the MCU. Not only is this after the biggest event of this franchise, as well as after the best Spider-Man movie, period, but also during which its future is a little uncertain. At best, we know that there's a Black Widow prequel coming out at some point. Please be better than Captain Marvel. But when it comes to anything else, Disney is being oddly secretive. Well, this is Sony, but, you know. The best way to go into this is by not thinking of it as a big, serious event. If you've seen the other one, as well as any ads or trailers for this, you know it's more of a lightweight breather than a big, shattering continuation from Endgame. And that's a good thing. That's what I expected, and that's what I looked forward to. Especially considering that Spider-Man Homecoming was the best live-action Spider-Man film since the Raimi second one. Or maybe the third for ironic purposes.
We don't really talk about this.
It was funny, it had a unique high school perspective that made it feel fresh and relatable. Tom Holland is an outstanding Peter Parker. The Vulture was an outstanding villain. It's one of my favorite MCU films, right up there with Guardians of the Galaxy and Infinity War. Now with that said, Close to Home was pretty alright. Similar to the last one, it has a really cheery comedic tone and for the most part feels more laid back and relaxed. I still really enjoyed this interpretation of Peter Parker and how much anxiety he has over everything. He has to deal with both being a normal high school student and an Avenger. Not a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, an Avenger. That's an enormous amount of pressure on this kid's shoulders, and you really feel for him in this. He just wants to have a normal vacation with his classmates and to confess his feelings to the girl he likes, which that alone is a big enough deal to him. But nope, Nick Fury and his Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. have to pull him back in to stop a thing from happening. Woof. What a life. I briefly touched upon in my Endgame review how weird I found in the trailer that Peter and his friends are all alive and the same age after the events. Well, the movie confirms that they all happen to get snapped up at the same time. That's a bit of a coincidence, but it doesn't matter because you have classmate shenanigans. I didn't get a whole lot out of the recurring thing of his friend having a girlfriend. It was sort of the same joke over and over again. It's still fun to see how utterly pathetic Flash Thompson is as a bully. It's nice to see Bill from Freaks and Geeks still getting work. And lastly, but most essentially, I really enjoyed the character of MJ. A sardonic high schooler with a dark sense of humor is a really fun and original take on this character. As far as I know, I've never read the comics, don't at me. Her scenes with Peter are cute, and I believe their chemistry. And I could say the same for the scenes he shares with Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. Well, I wouldn't quite put him up there with Vulture or most other Phase 3 villains. He does leave a decent enough impression to not completely fade from obscurity. Also, Gyllenhaal's just kind of a fun weirdo in all these press interviews. He just goes on these bizarre tangents while Tom Holland just sits by uncomfortably.
Without Cabbage Patch Kids, Benedict Cabbage Patch wouldn't have a career and you wouldn't have Dr. Strange. So think about it.
Yet despite his best efforts, the stuff pertaining to him are kind of the weaker points in this. You see, many months ago when the trailer first came out, a friend of mine who was very well versed in comic books and Marvel accurately predicted what the plot of this film was going to be, based on his knowledge of Mysterio. I'm not going to give any of it away, but it did send the plot down a pretty predictable path. I could probably blame that friend for giving it away, but what am I to do? Besides that, even though I did say the movie was funny, there are definitely a lot of jokes that don't land. Some, as I already mentioned, were just repetitive. Others felt a little too sitcom-y for my tastes. There wasn't anything interesting about it from a filmmaking perspective. It's just kind of shot like a regular comedy movie, and whenever action happens, it falls into a position in which it's not bad, but it feels sort of standard. There is one really good fight that I once again won't spoil, but it involves Peter being roped around Mysterio's powers, and that whole sequence was really cool looking. It reminded me of that one scene from Doctor Strange. You know, Marvel should just do a whole movie of people fighting in surreal kaleidoscopic imagery. I mean, I would watch it. So all in all, Spider-Man Homeward Bound is alright. These are the kind of films that I feel Ant-Man should have been. I'd much rather follow this high school student trying to juggle between two lives than Paul Rudd and his buddies getting into wacky shenanigans. I gotta make it home before my house arrest! Though it does kind of say something that my favorite scene from it was the mid-credit scene, not only because it had a cameo appearance that made me go, oh my god, holy shit, but also it teases something really interesting. Something that made me realize, you know, maybe Marvel can still surprise me, even after Endgame. Sure, I'm a little more excited for the future than I am for this present, but I take that as a decent win. 6 out of 10.
We only do this every 90 years.
Midsommar is the new A24 horror movie, meaning general audiences are gonna hate it. About a woman who, after suffering a tragic event, joins her boyfriend and his douchey bro friends to participate in a Swedish festival where spooky things slowly happen. Oh no. Well, A24 makes very different original content in a big Hollywood establishment. Ari Aster is an interesting visionary, and Hereditary was one of my favorite films last year, so obviously this intrigued me. So I saw it, and it was good. Not as good as Hereditary, but a decent follow-up. A premise similar to that of The Wicker Man, or Man of the Hands of Fate, or that one Radiohead music video, or The Village. I don't really watch a lot of horror movies about small village people. In which Swedish celebrations pertaining a lot of insane rituals, which are based off actual folklore, framing around a smaller, though more important story about trauma and the needs of connecting with people. Something I was guaranteed to get out of this was some spectacular visuals and direction, and it did not disappoint in that category. Much like Hereditary, the visuals carry a lot of weight, as well as having outstanding presentation and downright brilliant framing. It's such an interesting creative choice that his last film mainly takes place at night or in the dark, while this takes place during daylight with a very bright palette. The first act of this even opens in a dark, snowy atmosphere, which in of itself is highly contrasting to the rest. One element that stands out to me is whenever a character takes any drug, it doesn't do anything over the top like the background melting into the setting or characters and objects turning alive or whatever. It's this more subtle thing in that elements on the screen very subtly warp a little, like a circular part is becoming slightly bigger. It's sorta hard to describe, but it puts you into this dazed feeling, like you're on drugs yourself. The acting was as amazing as I expected. Florence Pugh gives an outstandingly emotional performance that I'd say is up there with Toni Collette's. There's a scene early on where she's on the phone with someone and the camera stays on her for like 2 minutes, but there's so much emotion on her face that entire time. Every other actor does a pretty great job as well. Will Poulter was actually pretty funny as the biggest idiot of the group. While this is by no means a comedy, there were some surprisingly humorous lines at certain points, including one about Austin Powers of all things. What's sort of interesting to consider is that the protagonists feel kinda like the opposing force of the movie. I mean, the villagers do some messed up shit and end up looking worse, but they seem far more happier and content with their lives than any of these people. The score is amazing as well. It's performed by Bobby Krilic, or the Haxon Cloak, and listening to it just puts you in the mood of distress and discomfort. I noticed that did that same thing that Hereditary did, where the credits play an ironically cheerful song that contrasts it with the prior events. Wonder if that's going to be a trademark for this director. I feel like the biggest detriment of the film is its length. It's 2.5 hours long. I wouldn't say I was bored, but around the third act I was starting to feel kind of skittish. Like, we get it, you don't need to show a shot of each and every person reacting to this thing happening. I'm also not sure how well the story ties together in the end, especially in regards to the protagonist's family backstory. Maybe it was to say the villagers are like a family of their own, but I'll probably have to read into it a little more. It's hard to talk about immediately after seeing. I remember feeling a similar way about Hereditary, but after much thought and reflection, it ended up being one of my favorite films of last year. I'm not sure if I would put Midsommar up to that same standard. I guess if I think about it more, I'll have a larger appreciation. But as of right now, I'm not sure how likely I would be to jump to the chance of rewatching it. Don't let that stop you from checking it out. Ari Aster is certainly someone I'm keeping my eye out for, just as long as you know you're getting a lot. 7 out of 10.